Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of our Salt Founders Corner. With me today is Roey Eliyahu. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and as you can tell, I'm wearing a hat today, and it's my Salt driver's hat because we're going to drive through a little bit of a customer journey and how our customers go through API security. And speaking of customers, maybe we start with that, Roy. I know you talk to a lot of customers every day, every week. You're out there as much as you possibly can be. What are you hearing lately, or any conversations you're having with customers that people would be interested in?
When I talk to customers or potential customers, is really talk about what their priorities, what their issues, what pain points they've seen, what were you seeing, and kind of sharing that knowledge. And I think the number one problem that exists in the API security market is actually getting down the basics, right? Which is discovery of all APIs. And I think we always had this problem when I started the company with Michael 6-7 years ago. We still had this problem of discovery, but the problem that it got way worse in the last couple of years, and especially last year or during this year with all the GenAI trend that essentially accelerated the development of APIs. So if you think about it, the problem that I'm hearing constantly from companies is there is a security team that needs to inventory all their APIs, know what they are, what data going through those APIs, but they have no control of the development of these APIs. Developers are just pushing new APIs, new changes to existing APIs, consuming, integrating to third-party APIs, and they try to get the basics of how do we get a hold of all of these APIs. We have different cloud environments, we have tons of AWS accounts, we have legacy applications, we have Kubernetes, we have traditional workloads. How do we know what we have, right? That's probably the number one issue. That's the starting point.
Yeah. So you bring up a good point about this discovery. You mean like just discovering the APIs or getting an inventory, but there are tools that do that. So why do people need something additional if they have something where they could get basically a basic inventory of their APIs?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think this is a misperception in the market that, or for some companies, that they say, hey, we have API gateways, we have different tools that help us to inventory APIs. Why do we need API discovery? So this problem has depth. There is kind of the breadth and there is the depth.
Yeah.
Let's start with the breadth. These tools know what you told them to know, essentially. You configure them to say, hey, expose API A, B, and C. If you are not aware of a developer developed an API D, right, that is exposed directly to the internet, and nobody documented it, it's not going to exist in these tools as well. They do not discover, they just store information you already know. Think about in the world of sales as an example. Salesforce is a good example. You know, if you have deals you are working on as a sales individual, if you put it in Salesforce, it will exist there. But if you just do it off of emails, it will not exist in Salesforce. Salesforce is not going discovering things in your Slack or emails and so on and so forth. So it's the same problem exists with these tools. They do not really discover APIs. They just maintain or inventory whatever you put in them. So the problem today, from a breadth perspective, the developers push new APIs that are not being managed by API gateways. They're just being exposed directly to the internet. They integrate to third-party APIs like GenAI APIs to leverage them as part of their application and innovation. And they can send sensitive data, customer data to these third party, and security team have no idea that it's happening. And not talking about internal APIs as well. So the short answer on the breadth side is less than 20% of APIs are actually being inventoried in these tools, and about 80% are just being unknown, and it's like rapidly growing because of the growth rate of APIs. The second problem is the depth. When we talk about API, there's different level of information to API. There is one, you need to know there is an API. We have a payment API. Okay, what type of information going through this API? Do we have sensitive data going through those APIs? Is there any changes that occur to this API that suddenly expose sensitive data? Is this API being authenticated, and so on and so forth? So typically these tools have very limited information of this API. And if you think about a lot of incidents that happen in the market, what happens is suddenly, one day, a developer pushed a change that suddenly leaks sensitive data. And it's a simple change in what this API exposed. Obviously, it's unintentional change. So by design, you will not update it, right? You will not update a mistake Otherwise, we would prevent it in the first place.
Yeah.
So even if it's going through a gateway, many times we see unintentional data exposure or sensitive data exposure. So you want to get the depth and you want to get the breadth across your entire environment.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great way to think about it too, that you need to know not only all that you have, but then also what about them, right? It's not just a listing in a spreadsheet of like an API name. There's more to it. Like what is the context around it? So I think that's right on. There's something I wanted to bring up that as you were talking, I've heard the phrase zombie and shadow APIs. Maybe talk a little about what each of those are as part of this idea about discovery.
Yeah, so let's start with zombie APIs. Zombie API, essentially it's an API, an old version of an API that you developed V1 of an API and it's out there. And after some time, let's say a year or 6 months, you develop V2 and your application now interfacing V2. But V1 is still out there. Nobody is using it, but it's still out there exposed. And V1 has access to your same database, same customer data. So the problem that companies have that they do a lot of security enhancements and adding security layers and authentication authorization mechanism to V2, but attackers just change the API URL to /v1, and it's like an easier door with a weaker lock on it, if at all, that they can go through to get to your account jewels. So the idea of identifying zombie APIs is seeing these APIs that they go out of traffic, not being used anymore, not active APIs essentially, and helping our customers really to identify and remove those so they reduce their attack surface to ensure they don't, they don't lock the door and somebody come through the window.
Right.
So that's on the zombie API. Shadow API is essentially another name for a different type of rogue APIs. It's essentially developers that are pushing APIs that are not following the process of exposing this API through an API gateway, doing a security review for this API. They just push an API, expose directly to the internet, and there is no governance around it. There is no security standards that this API should comply with because it's not going through any formal review. So we help our customers identify all these shadow and rogue APIs. So first of all, they have a full grasp of what they have, where they have it, and who owns these APIs, also a critical part. And also help them to assess them against security standards to ensure whatever they expose meet all the security requirements they have internally in the company. So there is no door to your account jewels that is not fully protected.
Yeah, and it speaks to this, what we started talking about, which was discovery, that you need to understand all that you have. Maybe we'll call them just regular APIs or shadow or zombie, but all of them, and understand the context around those. You brought up something else at the beginning that maybe we'll close with. You mentioned AI and how developers are using AI or GenAI to create APIs quickly. The volume that they can create is a lot more than or the quantity that they could before. But how is Salt using those? When you think about the discovery part of someone's journey, is they first want to discover it, then they want to manage the APIs or govern them, and then they want to stop any attacks. What is Salt doing on the first part of that discovery part how is Salt leveraging AI?
Wow, that's a big question. I could spend a lot of time on that, but if I kind of limit that just for the discovery piece alone, let's talk about first of all how you do discovery, right? Our discoveries basically have multiple phases. One phase is doing an attacker point of view. We have our Salt surface that discover all the APIs from the outside. So there's no deployment, no traffic collection, nothing of that sort. Just showing you as a customer what the attacker view from the outside. So from that perspective, we are using a lot of tools, including AI and GenAI, to really find all these exposure throughout the web. So we train a lot of models and looking throughout the web to a lot of public repos and other techniques that are kind of secret sauce of how we map your attack surface on the outside. Secondarily, once we get this information and we get API data in that we collect from the environment, we use the AI to really classify and group your APIs in a very in a way that aligns to your essentially to your business, right? Otherwise, it's a bunch of logs, it's a bunch of noise, right? If you ever seen an API and how it's built, if it's not properly grouped and classified correctly, you will have millions of records, and you basically start. It's almost like this, like you get back to square one, because if there is too many and you cannot rationalize them, understand what do I do with that, it's almost like it is the same outcome of having no idea what APIs you have. So we're using AI to smartly classify APIs to business units, to applications, to owners, to get an accurate view of your inventory. So we can actually go to the second step, which is how to govern them, how to assess them for risk. So that's in a nutshell what we do with AI. The last part I will say is about data security. And I think that's another part that is a common misperception in the market. There is a big pain points around data security, and you see a lot of companies are adopting DSPM tools. DSPM tools are only good for data at rest, not data in motion. But most of your data or the customer's data is actually going exposed through your applications. And part of our AI is really to able to analyze and identify these sensitive data going in and out an environment to give them the complete view of their data, not just data in S3 buckets and in databases, but also what data the application exposed, share with third parties. So we are training a lot of models on that because there's a lot of unstructured sensitive data going through all of these APIs.
Yeah. That's a great point, and I think we'll get to that. We're going to talk about that in our next episode as we kind of go through the journey a little bit more. But I think what you were saying in terms of the first step that people go through the discovery, Salt's using AI to look at your environment from an attacker's point of view. The product is called Surface that with. That adds some intelligence, some context. But then also, once you have the list or the inventory of APIs, then adding this context to it so that it is not just a list of potentially hundreds or thousands or even millions of just rows in a database or in a spreadsheet. So we're gonna follow up. We're gonna take the next step in the next episode. Will be episode 4, where we talk about posture as the middle step of and governance as the middle step in the journey. For now, Roy, thank you for joining us. For everybody that's listening, we do these every 2 weeks, so please check back in. Thank you again for being part of Salt's Founders Corner podcast.
Thank you for having me.